Live to see it, friends, and welcome to The World Transformed. I'm Phil Bowermaster, and all this week I've been talking with entrepreneur and futurist Nate Gruendemann. How you doing, Nate?
Doing really well, Phil.
Well, it's great to have you back for a Friday show. You know, we usually kind of cut loose a little bit on Friday. We're going to geek out here at the end, but I thought before then, as promised on Wednesday, we were going to talk about the future of everything. So I hope you're ready.
I'm ready.
Got your futurist shoes on, and let's start. Pick a topic. What futurist thing would you like to talk about first?
Let's try aliens.
Aliens? You know, the great thing about aliens is they're not even necessarily futuristic, of course. As you know, they built the pyramids, so they've been around here for quite some time. And ancient structures on Mars even long before that. We did a show just a few weeks ago talking about the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University has put out a report, and people who've been on the show before, Anders Sandberg was one of the contributors to it, and K. Eric Drexler was one of the contributors to it, talking about the fact that it's perfectly plausible that we're alone in the universe. They've run the numbers and they've done the math, and they're not saying there's no aliens, but they're saying there could be no aliens. And we contrasted that with a story that said there's enough good evidence now on the UFO side that we should really be seriously scientifically investigating UFOs. So, right, I mean, the truth is out there, and it lies somewhere between those two positions, right? That there's no good reason to believe there's aliens, and even the crazy alien theories, right, have enough evidence behind them that they can be scientifically investigated. So where do you stand on the whole?
Where do I stand? Well, you know, it's actually really interesting. I was in a cab ride the other day, and my Uber driver was talking that she had an alien encounter.
Oh.
And I think there are all
now
these.
We're getting somewhere.
Yeah, I know. I think there are all these YouTube videos going around. I've never seen one, but apparently they're super popular, talking about how there are lizard people and alien encounters happen all the time. So apparently this is, in common media now. It's the zeitgeist to have this conversation, and people really believing they have alien encounters. Now, I don't know. I think reality is subjective, and I've never had an alien encounter, so who am I to say? But yeah, it's also really interesting seeing, the news reports about, these fighter pilots having these weird encounters with objects that they don't understand. So
it's interesting when you hear it from the Navy or the Air Force, or when it's a major astronomer who has seen something that's weird, or an astronaut. When you hear it from some random person, if your Uber driver tells you there's aliens everywhere, that's one thing, right?
That is one thing.
And of course, Lord knows they encounter enough people that they, they've seen some stuff. But when you hear it from a presumably authoritative source, it takes on a whole different feel to it.
Exactly.
At that point. And one of the things that I said to Stephen last time we talked about this is the fact that there might be weird visual phenomena occurring in the sky is still a big leap to there are extraterrestrial civilizations.
Exactly. I think we're attributing a story that we like to tell ourselves to experiences that we can't describe.
Right.
And I think that might be a similar story to some of the old stories that cultures used to tell about, gods and the universe and why things happen the way they did. It's an interesting storytelling, phenomenon, and
I think there's something almost mythological about aliens that it taps into that part of our whole perception of of human experience of reality.
Exactly.
And I just want to say, although I'm skeptical about UFOs, I remain skeptical about UFOs in the face of authoritative evidence. Not skeptical that people are seeing something. I think they must be seeing something.
I agree.
Those videos are showing something.
And there's plenty out there that we don't understand.
Yeah. That it proves that we're not alone in the universe, sadly, I don't think it does.
Exactly.
However, I also have a close friend who is completely convinced that there are aliens all around us. And he's not a crazy person, but there's a lot of different ways of looking at this stuff.
Definitely.
I don't think there's aliens all around us. I think it would be awesome if I met an alien. I think anyway,
it would be pretty
if
cool.
they didn't eat my brains or something, if they just wanted to hang. But we got a ways to go. I'm hopeful that the near future we will discover something like Tabby's star, which we talked about quite a bit on the show. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it was basically a star that it gets dimmer and then gets brighter.
Yes.
You've heard of this, right? And so what was causing that to happen? One possible theory was it's being orbited by some huge structure.
Alien superstructure,
right? Yeah, they're building a structure around it. And we've had a few other things happen along the same lines. We had that weird comet come into and out of our solar system that behaved in a way that wasn't the way a comet should.
Exactly.
We're able to see the universe a lot better than we were in years gone by. So I'm hoping that we're going to actually see something in the near future that confirms that there are aliens. Unless they're like really hostile, scary aliens, in which case I'm hoping that we don't find out about them. And more importantly, that they don't find out about us.
Well, to that point, I think the reason why the Fermi paradox is, the Fermi paradox being that we haven't seen evidence of extraterrestrial life yet. It could all come to my hypothesis that it all could come down to just the fragility of complex systems. So we are a complex species, and as we sort of scale up and as the world becomes ever more complicated and interconnected, especially with globalism and all those things, that eventually we could wipe ourselves out. We've already seen that capability, or just the systems collapse ultimately.
Yes.
And complex systems collapse. And so, at least to me, this is sort of the apocalyptic mind you're running. But
and we'll get to the Robo-apocalypse in just a moment. So
Robot-apocalypse, I'm on it.
Keep going with that.
But yeah, I think it's at least the most logical hypothesis to me for answering the Fermi paradox is just the complexity of the
things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Right.
I love that poem.
Yeah. So if that's the case, well, let me lay one slightly more hopeful one on you.
Please.
Which also accounts for the Fermi paradox, and it goes to something we were talking about on the Wednesday show, which is just that maybe as civilizations get more and more advanced, their virtual realities become more and more compelling, and ultimately they're not just virtual realities, they're creating essentially real realities, moving into essentially other universes. And the reason we've never seen anybody is because they're all just off in their own spaces that they've created. There's no reason to deal with macro space because they're dealing with these tiny little micro spaces. And if that one sounds creepy and scary to you, it's like, well, that's better than they wiped themselves out.
Exactly.
Sure. So and maybe we'll be the ones who actually get in spaceships and fly around and find all these
I hope so.
Aliens with their headsets on.
Elon Musk and diversifying the planets we live on, like those are all very hopeful realities and inspiring to me.
Absolutely. Okay, so we were hopeful for a moment. Now let's get right back into it with the robot apocalypse. Is this something you worry about? Are you losing sleep over this? Tell me where you are with this, Nate.
I know there are lots of people on both sides of the aisle here. I know there are the pessimists and the optimists, people talking about AI and robots being world enders or just helping humans. And I think the right answer is probably somewhere in the middle. It's definitely fun to think about, Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator. That is a future that we could see ourselves. That is a story we can tell ourselves.
Right.
But it might look more like Skynet. Skynet sort of being that AI that has control over military systems and can make decisions on who lives, who dies, those sorts of things. I think Skynet is a much more possible future than a Terminator, a Terminator robot.
Right. And of course, they're in the same story. So they exist in the same universe. It's interesting. Skynet is kind of like well, you don't learn too much about it, but I presume Skynet is kind of like the intelligence in the Matrix, right? That's behind that world. That there was this artificial intelligence that rose up and it decided I'm in charge now, and human beings are just one of the many things that I have to deal with.
Absolutely.
Right? So here's my solution to what happens with human beings. If that is to occur, it doesn't have to be an apocalypse.
It doesn't.
The thing is, we could have a completely benign artificial intelligence that puts us in a happy place, right?
Totally.
In fact, that was one of the stories in the Matrix, right? Was they start out trying to make you happy, but you're too hard to make happy. So we had to give you a partially miserable world. Now that would be obviously better than being wiped out, but maybe not as good as moving forward in evolution. So the best case scenario, obviously, is one where we're working cooperatively with our AIs. That,
absolutely.
They're not necessarily our slaves, but we're not necessarily their minions either. That maybe somehow we form a partnership, a collaboration with them, and nobody gets wiped out.
Right. And I don't think the apocalypse and utopia are mutually exclusive either. I think robots could have some control and help us make certain decisions. They already do. Big data, like helping us make decisions with where to allocate resources and that kind of thing. Like, that's AI being directly helpful today. And I even think maybe AI is sort of like a safeguard. Like, if a president wants to push the big red button and launch a nuke, maybe an AI could do some analysis and it's like, is this a good idea? Like, are we really under immediate threat? Like, maybe they could actually make us safer.
That's actually what happened in real life in the, was it 1960s or early 70s? A fairly low-level functionary somewhere in the architecture of nuclear war in the Soviet Union got the order. The order shouldn't have been given, but it was given, and it was a legitimate order, and he was supposed to push the button, and he didn't do it. I can't think of the guy's name. We've talked about him on the show several times, but basically he is the man who saved the world. And his birthday should be a holiday, right? I mean, he's the greatest guy ever.
Wow.
In a lot of ways, but the fact that the system was complex enough that it had to go through enough filters, and there was one guy who said, "No, I don't think so. I'm not hitting this. I'm not hitting this button and causing World War III." We have that capacity.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we can create systems that have that capacity too, right?
And when you think of a hierarchical system where one person has the freedom of choice to make some decision like that,
right?
Like pushing the big red button. I worry that, or it's hopeful that an AI maybe could help us make those decisions, or help it make it harder or more difficult to make those decisions.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that would be good. Also, I think there are possible combinations of us interrelating with AI that we've never thought about before, because it always tends to go to...
Absolutely. The stories we've already told ourselves.
That's right. There are slaves, or we're their slaves, or we're at war with them. I doubt a war would go much of anywhere. Either we're still on top and we wipe them out, or they get on top and they wipe us. It's very asymmetrical.
Very. And again, stories are only interesting when they're on the poles.
One story that dealt with the asymmetry, I thought, in a really wonderful way was, did you see the movie Her?
I didn't, actually.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to spoil it for you now. But Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with an operating system. We've talked about it a number of times on the show. It's a really cool love story between a human and an AI. And what happens is the AIs they quickly outgrow us, right? It's like, and you can have this wonderful transcendental experience of love with this other being who suddenly just has no use for you any longer. And I think something like that could happen too.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily in interpersonal relationships, although that's a possibility, but just kind of in who we are to them and who they are to us.
Yeah.
Where the end of the movie is, on the one hand, it's kind of there's a hopeful note in that we're glad this happened to us. But on the other hand, there's just kind of devastation that this hole that they leave in our lives when they go, look, we got to go do our own thing now. Kindergarten was great and all, but we're PhDs now, so enjoy your universe, and they're done with us. Those kinds of possibilities, I think, are real and untapped and unexplored, and we probably need to spend more time thinking about that, right?
Yeah, I think it's all going to be in the nuance. Right? Yeah, it's all whatever the reality that comes to be is so dependent on what we need, what we're looking for, how we program them. And so if we're like, we need them to be dependent on us, or for love, as in the case of Her, or making big decisions, whatever it be. I think it's all up to what we need them to be, and and of course that's well before the singularity. Yeah, well,
up until they decide what they need to be, and ultimately, if they decide what we need to be, they make good decisions along those lines. Okay, so I've got designer babies here on the list of possible topics.
Absolutely. So
some thoughts on that?
I'm only a 22-year-old. I'm not an ethicist. But again, going back to complex systems. I think there's a lot of risk when we look at CRISPR and designer babies, and not just from the ethics of will we be one homogeneous super race, but what kind of unintended consequences are we going to see when we start playing with genetic code?
Right. Well, hopefully, designer babies will at least overcome the idiocracy effect. Right. This is one of my hopes for that. Is you're familiar with the movie Idiocracy?
I'm not.
Oh well. I'm gonna help you out with. We're gonna do a weekly movie session or something like that. Get you caught up. But in the movie Idiocracy, a guy gets transported forward into the future, and he's now the smartest man on Earth, because what's happened on Earth while he was gone, and this is actually a real demographic trend, is that the most intelligent people have the fewest kids, and regular intelligent people have a moderate number of kids, but the dumb people have lots of kids, and this occurs over generation, and suddenly you've got a world where people are visibly less smart. And because this guy was pretty average, actually maybe on the low side of average in the 20th century or 21st century, and now he's the smartest guy in the world, and it's not saying much, okay, to say he's the smartest guy in the world. So that's a real effect. How do we counteract that? Well, one of the ways I've said that is if we can actually boost intelligence, and not even just in vitro. Yeah. But if we can boost intelligence for ourselves, right? Once we're up and running, then that will help counter that effect.
Right. I'm of the opinion that messing with intelligence, let's say we identify the intelligence gene being this, or more likely it's a whole thousands of genes, a combination.
Yeah.
What happens when you start playing with those? Because those genes also affect other things, and I'm worried about the implication of messing with that. It's such a complex system that I don't believe understanding the parts could ever lead you to understand the whole.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, you have to wonder if there would be just a quick. Is there anything you could just do genetically to make a more intelligent person? Like, there's not just one gene, right? There's going to be, to your point, a whole complex of things that have to be impacted. But
I think we're able to sort of think through this stuff, and today we can play with one gene. We say, oh, it's activated, deactivated, but I think most of what we want to change about ourselves, be it disease, intelligence, looks, I think that those things are probably way too complicated for us to comprehend, and if we tried to meddle, I think there might be some things that we're not so happy about.
There will definitely be unintended consequences. There will definitely be side effects that we're not looking for. One of the things Ray Kurzweil talks about is, let's not get so excited about designer babies, but he's very excited about designer baby boomers, right? It's like taking adults and even older adults and people who are in a position to make these decisions, right? So you don't have the ethical concerns about hey, I want my child to have gills, right? I mean, those kinds of things are very problematic for the kid who then comes out and says, I didn't really want gills, thanks. But an adult, particularly adults where we've got mortality staring us down. We're looking at potentially getting cancer. We're looking at all these different things that can happen to us. Sure, you want to mess with my genes a little bit? Okay, I know that there might be unintended consequences, but I'll assume the risk of that. And once things have been established through adults modifying their genes, then maybe if something is really firmly established, or once it's in the germline, I suppose, then you can start producing kids. That have.
Yeah, but I mean, what happens when you do start having kids? Like, again, ethical issues. Like,
it's true.
But I guess today you don't really have a choice whether or not you come to this world either. So,
that's right. Yeah. Nobody has ever had a vote in that.
Exactly.
Or got to pick their parents.
Yeah. Or their genes. So
or any of it, socioeconomic status, any of that stuff. However, I have to say that if you look at things like the piercing community and tattooing and things like that,
the biohackers,
people are going to be doing stuff. It's going to be really interesting. Gills, forget it. Big dorsal fins. This is the one Stephen and I talk about. What happens when, a few years down the road, okay, when you got a kid in high school and all the other kids have a dorsal fin, right? Are you going to let your kid have a dorsal fin? This is the question. These are the kinds of issues you're going to be dealing with.
It's not the iPad anymore. It's a dorsal fin.
And you'll say, no! And if Phil Bowermaster was still alive, he'd tell you that that's just not a good idea to have a dorsal fin. But you can blame me if you want to.
Totally.
When you tell them they can't. Okay, so I think, you know, that's a fun one. I think it's true that we will probably encounter more and bigger problems with that than we're anticipating. But I do look forward to whether it's genetic or whether it's done through nanotechnology. I look forward to things like being able to stay underwater for an hour at a time. Or, you know, I look forward to personally running a 4-minute mile. I think that kind of stuff would be...
That would be excellent.
That would be pretty awesome. In fact, I might do that after we get done recording here. Just jump outside and see how close I can get to that. Okay, so I got one more topic. And this actually takes us back to the subject of housing. We didn't talk about this on our show on Wednesday. But you added seasteading to the list of topics that you'd like to get into. We've talked about seasteading in the past. Tell us first, give us a quick idea what that is for those who haven't heard the term before, and where do you think it's going?
Sure. So so basically seasteading is the idea that, you know, there's a new frontier on the ocean, and governments have a monopoly on all the land-based society. And seasteading is an alternative, and that's what's really hopeful and inspiring to me. It's this idea that people can go out on the seas and try something new, where governments won't necessarily tell them what to do. And this isn't necessarily, you know, it sort of gets this libertarian rep. But really I see it as this movement for everyone, where anyone can go out, and if they feel like they're at a disadvantage today, or they feel like they're, you know, it's an unjust society, they can go out and say, you know what, I want to start my own. And that's a really hopeful reality. You know, right now, especially with the political climates and all the bipartisan stuff, like, you know, I just want people to work together again.
Yeah. Well, first off, a libertarian would tell you that they believe that their stuff is for everybody too.
Of course. Yeah. I just don't like those labels.
Yeah, you know? I'm with you 100%. I'm not big on the labels either. So a seastead is a self-determining community at sea, basically.
Exactly.
Built on a boat or a platform or an oil rig or whatever you can find out there and we've seen interesting concepts for these modular units where the boats can attach or disattach from each other. But the idea is you're outside of any national boundaries.
Yes.
You're on your own at sea, and therefore it's an opportunity to start fresh. You can define society exactly the way you want to define it. So
exactly. And you spoke about, you know, modular systems. Like, that's the real power of seasteading. It's the idea of vote with your house.
Yeah.
And we're talking about housing. You know, if you don't like the way that, you know, the seastead is being run, you leave. You know, sail over to the next one that has, you know, laws and rules and a society that you like better.
Right.
And so that's what I see as really powerful. It's sort of this entrepreneurial spirit with government. You know, today I think we had this grand experiment with the United States, but it's inspiring to think that there could be another one. You know, 1,000 seasteads out there could mean that we learn a lot more about the best ways to govern and the most just societies.
Well, we know that in business, competition definitely helps drive new ideas, helps drive innovation, helps you get to new and better things. And competition has existed in the geopolitical realm between nation states. Mm-hmm. We had the Cold War, communism versus capitalism, and we've before that we've seen feudalism versus.
Exactly.
I mean, different systems have gotten to compete against each other, but it's hard. It's hard to roll out a new system at the nation-state level. And once something's established, you pretty much need to keep it in place. You're talking about thousands and then millions of lives, billions now, living in nation-states. So how do you innovate systems of government? Well, one way to do it is to get off the nation-state model and work with something smaller.
Exactly.
Now, what works for a seastead might not reverse engineer back to a nation state, but maybe it would, or maybe the nation states start to break into something more seastead like in the long term. You know, we had city states before we had nation states.
That's exactly right.
Which were smaller units that were governed in a very different way. Mm-hmm. They grew up and became nation states. Those became empires, and then those broke off into nations. Exactly. So there's been a lot of different models, but it's taken a very long time. Mm-hmm. With the seastead, you can try a lot of different things in a fairly short period of time, right?
That's exactly right. And you were mentioning those city states. You know, those city states were much less fragile than the big, honking, nation states that we have today. And that's really where I sort of see everything going eventually, right? The empire's always fall, right?
Yeah.
There's no question about that. It's just what do they break up into?
Right.
Smaller units. Those smaller units are more robust. They can exist for longer. If one goes under, the rest don't. There's beauty sort of in that self-selection.
Absolutely. Well, I love the image of the seastead. I think next year we're going out to Lake Powell and we're going to spend a week on a houseboat. So I feel like this is my first opportunity, my preparatory step for seasteading. We'll see how if that one works, then I'm ready to try something bigger in the future. Okay, Nate, it's Friday. We're going to geek out, and as we mentioned on, I believe, the Monday show, you grew up in New Zealand.
I did indeed.
Essentially on the set of Hercules: The Legendary Journeys and Xena Warrior Princess.
Literally on the set.
So, do you have a wacky story to share that might be some good Hollywood dirt, or just anything fun experience you had as a kid growing up involved in those TV shows?
Absolutely. So I was born in New Zealand right when my parents were producing and writing Hercules and Xena, and at one point they needed a baby Hercules for one of the Universal attractions, the Universal Studios attractions.
Right.
They had this whole theme park for Hercules.
Okay, yeah.
And so I was baby Hercules.
Oh my God.
Yes, and that's my party story.
They took your picture, or what? How were you baby Hercules? What did you do?
I don't think I've ever seen the tape. It's somewhere. But I was, everyone used to make these jokes like Hercules is so pudgy, like.
Oh, so it was a scene. They shot a scene of baby Hercules.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So I was.
It was not in the series though. It was only at the theme parks.
I believe it was only at the theme parks, but again, I could be mistaken.
I'm going to have to go back and rewatch Hercules and see if we ever have a flashback to baby Hercules. If so, that's you.
Yes.
Oh.
Baby Nate as baby Hercules.
I feel like we have to go back and redo this whole week, because that should have been the first thing I said.
That should have been my introduction.
Yeah, exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, we have baby Hercules with us all week. That's amazing.
It is a fun story.
Baby Hercules. So that's cool that you were literally a part of it, right? I mean,
I was too young to really contribute in any way other than just lay there and maybe cry a little bit. But yes, I it's a fond memory looking back at New Zealand and all the times there. But yes, I was too young to really remember. And you said you were looking for Hollywood dirt.
Yeah, there you
go. Too young for that.
Yeah, but it's kind of on yourself anyway. This is the best way to do it. You got good instincts. Obviously, your parents raised you well, where that kind of stuff is concerned.
That they did.
How old were you when you moved to the U.S.?
Moved back when I was 4.
Oh, okay. All right. So were you born in New Zealand? Or?
Born in New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
I had the accent and everything, and unfortunately. As soon as I got back here, I was afraid of being different, and so in preschool, within 2 weeks of getting here, I had an American accent.
It's interesting how that stuff works. When I was living in Malaysia, my oldest was 7 and then 8 years old, and she was attending a British school, and she was picking up an Australian accent, because most of the kids there were Australian, but it immediately disappeared as soon as we got back to the U.S. Kids are very very adaptable.
Very adaptable.
That kind of stuff.
It's amazing.
All right, well, Nate, I think we've reached the end of our week. I can't tell you what a pleasure it's been having you with us on the show, and I hope you'll come back and join us again sometime, maybe when Stephen can make it too.
Likewise, Phil. It's been great to be here, and thanks so much.
All right, well, we will be back next week with 3 brand new shows. Thank you all for being with us. Thanks once again to our special guest all week, Nate Gruendemann. And until next time, live to see it.